Hey guys, so this is Lineage Part 1, Adam through the 12 tribes. Okay, so we have Adam who lived 930 years around the year 4004 BC in Eden. You can find that in Genesis 4 to 5. So here's his basic family structure: Adam and Eve, and their haplogroup CF, and they were born in what we call the Stone Age. Then we have their children, Cain, Abel, and Seth. Cain was a farmer, Abel was a sheep herder, and Adam had Seth at 130 years old. Cain's name means possession, Abel's means breath, and Seth means to appoint. Cain had to move to Nod, east of Eden, and he was marked by God not to be killed. Here's a map of a general idea. This is from a study of someone else, but I appreciated it and I felt like it was accurate. So this is Cain and the land of Nod, and Seth is outside of Eden near Ur. Ur is where the general understanding of the origins of humanity is. Now, Cain's family line. Cain had a wife, and they had Enoch. Enoch had Irad. Irad had Mehuiel. Mehuiel had Methuselah, and he had Lamech. Now, Lamech's kin. Lamech had two wives, Ada and Zillah. So Ada, they have Jabal and Jubal. Lamech and Zillah have Tubal-Cain and Naamah. Now, why are these important? Jubal and Tubal-Cain are noted in the Bible for being the father of the flute and the harp, and being the instructor of bronze and iron. So this switches from Stone Age to the Iron Age. Then we have Seth, his wife. He doesn't have kids until he's 105, but he has Enosh. Enosh has Canaan, then Mahalalel, then Jared, then Enoch, Methuselah, and Lamech. Lamech has Noah. So Noah's the one that everybody knows of. His name means rest. He's the builder of the ark. It's my understanding that he has the macro haplogroup of H, I, J, and K, and that's how we get the diversity in his children, which are Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now, some interesting things about Noah is in Genesis 5:29. It says, "This one will comfort us concerning our toil of our hands, because of the ground which the Lord had cursed." And then these are some dates. 2256, Noah's birthday. 2348, Noah's 600th year. 2347, Noah's 601st year, when they get off the ark. And then 1998, these are all BC, Noah's death year. At 500, he has Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Okay, and those come up with the distinct differences between the different cultures we have. These are the spared cultures that branch out and make all humanity that we understand and know now. This is an interesting little chart that I made. It is about Seth's kin, and we have the average age at birth of the firstborn is 145. So in this early part of the Bible, 145 is the average time in which you had your first kid, and the average lifespan at that time was 851 years. 2459 BC is when the flood occurred. So at 130, Adam has his first child, and then he lives 930 years. At 105, Seth has his first child. He lives 912 years. At 90, Enosh has his first child. He lives 905 years. At 70, Canaan has his first child. He lived 910 years. At 65, Mahalalel has his first, and he lived 895 years. At 162, Jared has his first, and he lived 962 years. At 65, Enoch the second, and why there's a little number up there is because there's other Enochs before him. He is translated at 300 years old, so he doesn't have an end of life. Then we've got, at 187, Methuselah has kids, and he lived 969 years. We have 182 Lamech II, and it is 777 years for him. And at 500, Noah has his kids, and he lives 950 years. So you can see that he lives through the flood time and past, right? Now, of Cain's kin, there are major events that occur within the same time period of this chart, okay? So at 4000 BC, these are historical events. The city of Sumer was noted to be built by archaeologists. So that's basically right after Adam is born. Then we've got 3600 BC is Tubal-Cain. 3200 is Jubal. So these are our iron and musicians that I highlighted before. And then at 3000 BC, we have Enoch the First, he is the one who built the first city. There's a Noah's kin overview, and it just gives you lots of different names that go with the different cultures within those people. I'm not reading through that. And then here's a map that has Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Their other names are Lud, Put, and Javan, and they're also referred to as the Semites. Shem is the Shemite, Semites. Ham is the pagans, and Japheth is the Gentiles. Okay, so here's a map showing where they basically went when they spread out after the flood. And then here is a different map that has different kind of names. So we see Gomer, Togarmah, and Ashkenaz. Those are Japheth. And the Ashkenaz are also called the Scythians. Okay. Then we have Lud, which is also called Lydia. Asher is Assyria, and Aram is Syria. Those, and Joktan, which is Arabia. Arphaxad, and Elam is Persia. So those are all Shem or Semites. And then more of Japheths are Javan, the Greeks, Kittim, Cyprus, and Madi, the Medes. Then of the green family, we've got the Hittites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Philistines, Mizraim, which is Egypt, and Put. Those all are Ham relatives. Shem, also called the Semites, he has a wife, and at 100 years old, he has sons and daughters, and he lives 604 years. So we have Elam, Asher, Arphaxad, Lud, and Aram. These are the 5 kids that Shem and his wife had. These are all Semites, okay, the same basic genetics. And then we have Chedorlaomer, which is the king of Elam in Genesis 14. You'll see that come up in a timeline in the future. Anytime you see a dotted line like that, that is my cue for skipping generations. Asher, we don't have a lot of information on Asher, except for the fact that he's the father of the Assyrian Empire. Cush built the empire, but he ruled it. Arphaxad, his name means rejecting the milk. Interesting name. And he's the father of the Chaldeans. Okay, so the Chaldeans exist. Then we have Selah and Eber. And then we have this interesting dynamic of Peleg and Joktan. So Peleg and Joktan are siblings, but Peleg's name means divided or earthquake. Joktan's name means smallness will be made little. Joktan is the father or patriarch of all the Saudi Arabian tribes. And interestingly, in the haploinformation, I found out that, which is on the political stage now, is a direct relative and has the same exact haplogenetics as Joktan. So, in that time period, I was given a dream that explained this, that Peleg and Joktan, Peleg meaning divided or earthquake, there was a literal earthquake at that time. The family had a physical division within them, and that same year they had a physical earthquake. So Joktan went over and spread out toward where we know as Saudi Arabia, and Peleg stayed more in the traditional Mesopotamian region. So looking at this little timeline, we have Noah's flood, then we have Arphaxad is born, and he has his kids, and then we have this divide. Ultimately, Peleg's family turns into the 12 tribes of Israel. And ultimately, Joktan's family turns into the Arabian kingdom, and they have 13 tribes. So back to the timeline, we have the Tower of Babel, which is around 2242. Then we have Abraham is born in 2166, and then we have Noah dies at 2113. So it's very likely that Noah knew all of these people, which is really cool. Back to the family lines. If we follow Joktan's lines, it's 13 different names. If you want to dig into that, you can. All that information is there. It's not essential to our story understanding the Bible. We have Peleg, who has Ru. He has Sereg. He has Nahor. He has Terah. Terah is the father of Abraham, who is the father of the promised land of Israel. There's a map here of Shem's sons, so you can get the general gist of those 5 sons, Elam, Asher, Arphaxad, Lud, and Aram, where those people spread out. So I'm going to zoom in. You can take a little look. You might want to look at that on the map when you're studying. Now we're going to dig into Ham's kin. So Ham had 4 boys: Cush, Mizraim, Put, and Canaan. Cush, his name means black. He has darker skin. We know that the people in the region, according to haplogroups, also darker skin, but many had light eyes. So Cush we have with light eyes and dark skin, and he is the father of Cush and Ethiopia. But he has 6 kids. They spread out to different regions, and these are very interesting, but this format is not able to really dig into that. But Seba is the South Palestinian into Ethiopia on the west coast of the Red Sea in the Nile region. Havilah is the Cushite Sudan region in Ethiopia, and the Zelia region, which is now called Eritrea. Sabata, his area was Ethiopia, now Eritrea. Rama was the father of many people, and his family essentially becomes Sheba and Dedan. So Keturah, her children, become Sheba and Dedan. Those regions, those people mix. Then we've got southeastern Arabia on the Persian Gulf. They're also called Sabaeans. Then we've got the Sabiaks, which means striking, or Ethiopia. And then Nimrod. Nimrod should stand out to you because Nimrod is the founder of Babel. So the Tower of Babel, that came from Cush's line, okay? Now, Mizraim is basically what you would think of as Egypt, Lower Egypt, and some of those people migrated north to what we call Philistines, okay? So in this first section, I'm going to give you a little more of where everybody goes. I'm not going to read down a lot of these that are detailed, but on this section, I think it's helpful. So Ludum, that's basically Egypt. Anonim is northeast Africa. Lebanon is North Africa, Libya. Naphtunium is broader Egypt and Africa, or the Sudan area. Pathtruism is the Pathros and Copts region of Upper Egypt. And they were a very advanced society. Interestingly, they are connected to the similar genetics as Havilah from Cush's side because they're all related. Then we have Kalshuam, which is the origins of the Philistines, the North Egypt through Sinai into Philistia, and then there's Caphtorium, who had the Philistine regions of the sea peoples. So these are the people that they go in through Philistines and then they find the islands. So they go to Crete and Turkey and different places, and then there's a group called the Avites, and they were the rulers of the Canaanite and Philistine regions, and they came against Joshua. They were known for sacrifice to Baal, and their chief god was Nibhaz, which is a human and a dog mixed together, and they got this from the Egyptian belief, and this was blended with Baalism. So the Lord of Darkness was his name. And then their secondary god was Tartak, which is Mars. You're going to understand through this that all the different cultures through time, they have the same gods, but they just call them different things because their language and their region is slightly different. Okay, so we have Put, who is the father of archers, and his name means a bow, and basically he is the Libyans. If you skip generations, we find Lubum, who is the Libyans and North Africans, the Cushites, the Sukhims, and the Egyptians, warriors and mercenaries. They lived in tents, even after people were civilized and lived in houses. Then we have Canaan, who's the father of the Canaanites, and he has Sidon and Heth. Sidon is the father of the Phoenicians, a city on the Mediterranean on the north side of Philistia, Lebanon, and Syria. They're very skilled artisans with purple dye and glass, and they introduced Baal worship to the area. And then Heth, some Bibles say Cheth, Shatter and Terror is his name. He's the origin of the Hittites in Turkey. If you skip generations, these two boys, Sidon and Heth, they come up with all the peoples that are called the Jebusites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Girgashites, the Hivites, the Arkites, the Arvadites, the Zemarites, and the Hamathites. Those families are all related to Canaan through these two boys. Now we're going to focus on Nimrod because that's a really big story. Nimrod is Noah, then Ham, then Nimrod. He comes up with his nations. He is a founder of Baal. He is also called Sargon of Akkad, Baal, Marduk, and son of Cush. He's the founder of many cities, which was Baal, Erech, Akkad, Calneh, and Shinar. These are very big stories throughout the Bible and cities that are referenced to. Okay, of Noah's sons, the next we're going to evaluate is Japheth and his wife. And all of his sons are called Gentiles. Japheth's sons are Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, Meshach, and Tiras. Gomer was an equestrian nomad. His people settled where the Cimmerians, the Celts, and Turkey. Ashkenaz, Riphath, and Togarmah were his sons. Ashkenaz is where the Cimmerians were near Armenia. I want you to understand the people who call themselves Ashkenaz are not but Gentile. They are not from the Semitic line. Riphath, on the North Bosphorus Strait, the coast of Turkey, and the south of the Black Sea. Togarmah are equestrian traders in the military north nations of the southwest Armenia and the southeast Black Sea. Magog is the father of the Scythians. His people were from the Caucasus Mountains and north. We've got the Ukraine, Russia, Iran, western China. Mountain equestrian warriors again. Gog is skipping generations. We get to Gog, who's the king of Magog. Magog is a place that Magog himself started, and Gog is the king of that place. He's the chief prince of Rosh. Rosh means the head. He's the king over Meshach and Tubal, the invader of Israel before Armageddon in the Revelation times. We now call that Russia. His descendants rise up versus God's people at the end of the 1,000-year reign for a second rebellion. Madai, which is the father of the Medes, so Persia, North Iran, Armenia, Media, Medes, Amadi, southwest Caspian Sea, the northwest Iram Desert, and the north Zagros Mountains, equestrian warriors, skipping generations in this family line. We have Shalmaneser, which is Chaldean in Iraq. We have Cyaxares, which is related to Nebuchadnezzar or Marduk, right before Alexander the Great took over Babylon in 330. So that's his family connections. He's also related to Cyrus the Great and the Persian Empire. Darius the Mede, which should sound familiar to you, as Xerxes or Xerxes, the king of the Chaldeans. This is the last king of the Medes. This is the king that we talk about in the Esther story. Then there is Darius, who is the prince of Rosh, the king over Meshech. He's an invader in the Armageddon story. Now, Darius, this line is also related to Gog. I mean, yes, they are genetic cousins, but there must be a mixing of these two toward the end. All right, so for Javan, we've got his name means Ionia. His place where his people branched out were Western Turkey, Ionia, and Greece. They were traders and archers, slave traders, and bronze vessel makers. If you skip generations, this line comes up with the 12 Ionian cities, and historically these are really important cities. They're ports of trade with the merchants from Phoenicia and the mainland of Greece. It's an area known as the pre-Socratic philosophers. They invented Greek math, the Pythagorean theorem, many things that we use in our life today. The area has the first scientific revolution, and they also worship Artemis. They're the first civilization to divide society by social order into 4 tribes, a coastal, a hill country, and plains and officials, all members of the tribe to break down rivalries. 10 tribes that gave each 50 members to a council of 500 for fair representation, and each tribe with a minimum of 1 ship. They were big on Poseidon worship. So these are really notes for me. If they offend you, I'm so sorry, but I have to do the faces. So these certain Greek groups and Italian groups and different things, they have very distinct genetic markers, and so there's a list there. Then we have the father of Cappadocia and Iberia, which is Tubal. And this is Eastern Turkey, the Basque people, Portugal, France, and the Samartia region. Now, these people were traders, archers. They were great with horses. They were slave traders. Some had light hair and light eyes. This is in the region of East Turkey, north of the Taurus Mountains. Later, Spain and Basque and France on the border of the Atlantic. Portugal, Atlantic side of Spain. France, after the Hittites fell, then some of these people took over the regions of Georgia and Russia and the Samartia region. Meshech, he's from the Kolis, Armenia, east of the Black Sea area. They were traders and warriors. Tiras was the father of the Thracians and Slavic people. So Bulgaria, northwestern Turkey, northwest Greece. This covers the Vikings, the Germans, the Slavs, the Swiss, the Dutch, and Finland. Okay, so here's a map of Japheth's family. Different colors represent different regions. It would be best if you look at that in person. Here's an overview of Seth's kin, Noah to Abraham. So the years go across the top, and we're going backwards in time all the way to 1800. So what we start with is where we stopped off last time in the person. We've got the flood, which was at 2559 in this study. So Noah, who had Shem, his firstborn, at 502 BC. He dies around 2113, 950 years. Then at 100, Shem has kids. He lives 604 years. Arphaxad has kids at 35. He lives 435 years. At 30, Salah has kids. He lives 433 years. At 34, Eber lives 464 years. At 30, Peleg lives 239 years. At 32, Ru has kids, and he lives 239 years. You can see we're descending in how long people are living, right? At 35, Serug is 235 years. At 29, Nahor has kids, and it's 145 years that he lives. At 70, Terah has kids. At 205 years. At 86, Abraham has his first son, but at 100, he has his first promised son. So I had to put both years there. And that is, he lives 175 years. So his firstborn, Ishmael, he lives 137 years, and Isaac lives 180 years. So here's the entire thing. The average age at the birth of the firstborn switches down to 42 years, and the average lifespan is 256 years. Now, these are some significant things that happened in the Bible and in world history that are at the same time periods as these important events. So we're going to start really at Terah, which is the Tower of Babel, was in his lifetime. Then we've got Egypt and the Old Kingdom at 2200, so that's in Abraham's lifetime. 2100 is the center of Mesopotamian life. Is the center of Mesopotamian life. That's in Abraham's lifetime. The Qi dynasty in China is 2070, so that is in Abraham's lifetime. 2067 BC is Abrahamic covenant at 99, and Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed. Then we have some things that are in Isaac's lifetime. So we have 20 plus or minus BC, which is the Indian civilization. And then we have 1898, which is Joseph was sold into slavery. Okay, now we're going to focus in on Terah and his kin. So we have Terah and his wife, and this is the royal bloodline that leads to Abraham, which also leads down to all the royal lines, okay? So he has 3 kids that are mentioned: Abraham, Nahor, and Haran. Notice that Nahor has a little 2. That means there was another Nahor in the list before he was born. Now, Abraham leaves for the promised land at 75, and he's got a complicated story. He marries his half-sister, which is Sarai at the time. Abram and Sarai go through a name change around 2090, and they change it to Abraham and Sarah. Okay, so it changes from meaning exalted father and quarrelsome or bitter to God's princess and a noble woman with character and integrity. So Abraham and Sarah have Isaac around 2066. Now, in Abram's story, he also had Hagar, which was Sarai's maid. So he has a child, Ishmael, by her, and that's around 2080 BC. And Ishmael has his own story. And then he also has a concubine, Keturah, which later he marries. Then Abraham and Keturah have 6 kids, which is Zimram, which are musicians in an Arabian city, Joksham, which are Sabaeans and Dedanites, or Sheba and Dedan, Medan, which were troglodytes or cave dwellers in Yemen, Midian, which were Midianites and Alianic Gulf Coast, Ishbak, were the father of the Arabian tribes in northeast Arabia, and Shua, which were the Shuahites and Aramaeans in the land of the Euphrates. Also, there were some that moved to Syria. Now, Haran, he died before Terah and Abraham left Ur. Terah named the city after this son. So there's a city called Haran, we'll see on a map, and he has Lot. We know the story of Lot with Sodom and Gomorrah. And then there's Milcah, which is his daughter. She's of a royal bloodline, and her name means queen with a court. And then Ishka. We don't know much about this sister. So, backing up to Nahor, the second-born, after Haran dies, he marries Milcah. And that's his niece. And they have a set of 8 children: Huz, Buz, Kemuel, Hesed, Hazo, Pildah, Jidlapah, and Bethuel. Bethuel becomes important in the story. Remember that one. All right, then he also has a concubine, Reumah, and they have 4 children. Here's the history of Haran. Haran was first known for its colorful pottery. It was the first to import carnelian and turquoise. It was the first to use stamp seals for ownership. They mastered irrigation. Their agricultural efforts were the center for wheat and barley. They also mastered sheep and goat and cattle and pigs and asses and gazelles, and they were the main traders of all these animals. Their communities were in 500 household villages. The homes were in rows with square rooms, mostly unplastered walls with earthen floors, no indoor hearths. They became the epicenter for trade between Egypt, Canaan, Elam, and the East, as well as the Mesopotamian regions. They began the culture of South Nineveh. They were mainly Semitic people, but they worshipped false gods. They were a center for worship. They had ziggurats. The kings came from all directions to make sacrifices to the gods. Their main gods were Sin for lunar worship. Western Haran was more farmland, which had beehive-shaped adobe houses. Eastern Haran was on the edge of Mari and an old Syrian city, and old Syria, and was more urban. They were on the Euphrates in current-day southeast Turkey, Iraq, and Turkey, and slave trade had firm rules and prices. We'll get into that later. Mari conquered them for a while, the urban side, and from that point on, they had written strong marriage contracts, slave documents. 20% of their citizens spoke an early form of the Semitic language similar to Hebrew. The rest used cuneiform, the Sumerian language. So here's a map of Terah's sons and where they kind of spread out. Okay, so we need to get into Abraham's life and his industry. There's some really important things that help us to understand Abraham, okay? First of all, he lives in Mesopotamia, so we're going to look at the Mesopotamian class system. There's the upper class, which were landowners, kings, and priests. The social class indicators of who was upper class were jewelry, nose rings, long beards, braids, rings, and camels. The lower class were farmers, laborers, household workers, and slaves. Abraham, we know, would be upper class by some of the things that we know about him. Because if you're in the lower class, you would have no opportunity to speak directly to people like the Pharaoh and the kings that he negotiated with. So the Bible history with Abraham's social class, he speaks with Pharaoh, Ineph II, Wakari, the 10th dynasty in 2091, King Chedorlaomer, if you remember, he came from Elam's line on the Shem line, King Melchizedek, king of Gerar, post-Sodom, Abimelech, post-Sodom. So this means he's upper class. He would never have opportunity to talk with them, like most people don't have opportunity to just walk up and talk to the president, right? So then we've got biblical facts. Abe was 75 when he leaves Haran. He owned camels. He had herds. He was rich in livestock. He was rich in silver. He had slaves. He gives jewelry as gifts. He worshipped other gods before God called him out to be set apart. This means he's upper class. All of those clues tell us he's upper class. Joshua 24:2, and Joshua said to all the people, thus says the Lord God of Israel, your fathers, including Terah, the father of Abraham and the father of Nahor, dwelt on the other side of the river in old times, and they served other gods. So Abraham was raised in the original Babylonian pagan system of ancient Mesopotamia. Of course, we know that he changed and was pulled out, and God taught him a different way. Okay, so we're going to look at a timeline here that is the Mesopotamian Bronze Age, and it's an overview of Abram's times, okay? So first we have Noah's flood, 2459. Then the Sumerian language is invented in 2400, so just 59 years later. Then Mari takes Haran. Mari's a guy, and he took over the city of Haran. Then we have Sargon's rule, which is Nimrod. That's another name for Nimrod. And what do we think about that? Sargon and Nimrod, that's the same as saying the guy who created the Tower of Babel. So Sargon's rule began in 2300. Sargon takes Haran. The Tower of Sargon's rule, or Nimrod, is 2300. Sargon takes Haran, the city that Mari had taken. He took it over. Then the Tower of Babel is built around 2242. Abram is born in Ur, in Mesopotamia, in 2166 BC. Then Noah dies in 2113. Abram is called by God. Terah and Abram go to Haran between 2130 and 2190 BC. The Sumerian Empire rises in 2100 BC, and Ur is rebuilt. The city that Abram was born in was rebuilt in 2100 BC. All right, Elam Shemaski dynasty. In the Bible, this man is referred to as Chedorlaomer. He becomes king in 2095 BC. The Ur III dynasty of Shulgi, in history is what it's called, but in the Bible, this is called Aramphal. This guy takes the throne in 2094 BC. Abram leaves Haran in 2091 BC. Tish Atal, king of Urkesh, or what we read in the Bible as title king of nations, takes the throne in 2090 BC. Lot's captivity and Abram and Melchizedek's negotiation is 2085 BC. In between this time, 1 year before Isaac is born, Sodom and Gomorrah is destroyed. Then Isaac is born in 2066. In 2000 BC, the Elamites take Ur. So Chedorlaomer is the Elamites, and they take Ur. So the Mari queen negotiates the Haran peace treaty for trade in 2000. Now, of this basic timeline, in this time period, we already have Lot. He exists because he left Sodom and Gomorrah, right? So this is the time period after Sodom and Gomorrah is destroyed that Lot, with his number one daughter and with his number two daughter, has two different children, not of his own choosing, but of their choosing. So the father of the Moabites is Moab, and the father of the Amorites is Ben-Ami. And that is the family there. Back up to the timeline, we have Abraham dies in 1991 BC, and then the Assyrian Empire rises in 1900 BC. Abraham was called out and set apart from the culture to be a monotheist. Genesis 12:1 and 2 says, "Now the Lord had said to Abram, get out of your country, from your family and from your father's house, to a land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation." And then James 2:23, "And the scripture was fulfilled, which says, Abraham believed God, and it was accounted to him for righteousness, and he was called the friend of God." So here's a map of Mesopotamia in Abram's day. Now notice there's a few extra things from the last map. Notice that God moves Abram, or Abraham, depending on what period of time it is, what his name is, consistently before an empire change occurs that would have brought him further into paganism by law, or would have been oppressive. So God, although it seems like, oh goodness, this is going to be terrible, I got to pick up and move and go to a new place, God is actually preparing him to be in a new place and be successful prior to what would be a really bad situation for him. He's trying to get him out of that culture and become a new person, a new nation. Okay, so now we need to look at Abraham's covenant with God that was made when he was 99 years old. On that day, the Lord God made a covenant with Abraham. That is Genesis 15:18. It had parties, terms, and promises. So the parties were God and Abraham. And God and Abe, through Sarah's child and his posterity and all slaves that were purchased. It's very specific that it's only through the child of promise. So that means the other two branches of Abraham's family lines are not in this particular covenant. The terms were to leave home and family, to go to the land I show you, to dwell in Canaan, to trust in God alone, to circumcise all males, for it is a sign of the covenant forever, as long as the terms of the covenant are met, because this is an Olam covenant, and then to establish Isaac as the heir of the blessing of the covenant. Then the promises of this are the land of Canaan. He would be a great nation. He'd be the father of many nations. He would be blessed. He would be a great name. He would bless those who bless. God will bless those who bless you, curse those who curse you, multiply the descendants exceedingly like sand of the sea and the stars and the dust of the earth. Descendants would be captives for 400 years, but exit with great possession and return to Canaan in the 4th generation. The descendants would dwell in Canaan. The descendants shall possess the gate of their enemy, and through his seed all families of the earth would be blessed. Now, where possible, every single fulfillment of that has been listed and different verses to support that. So then we have, now Abraham and his seed were the promises made. He does not say, and to seeds. It's only to a seed. What seed? The seed of only going through Sarah's child. And that means the blessings that come to the earth come through Isaac, and then Jesus, and then the whole world. Because in Galatians 3:16 it says, and to your seed who is Christ. That seed being spoken of is Jesus. Okay, then we have, this flows together. Okay, it's a double page spread. So we have Ishmael is blessed, but he is not part of the Abrahamic covenant. And I know that's a buzzword in our time because we have this little accord that's going on with a similar name. But they're really not in the same safety bubble. Let's call it that. So Ishmael is blessed, but not part of the Abrahamic covenant. Genesis 17:18 through 21 says, and Abraham said to God, oh, that Ishmael might live before you. Then God said, no, Sarah your wife shall bear you a son, and you shall call his name Isaac. I will establish my covenant with him for an everlasting covenant, and with his descendants after him. And as for Ishmael, I have heard you. Behold, I have blessed him, and I will make him fruitful, and I will multiply him exceedingly. He shall beget 12 princes, and I will make him a great nation. But my covenant I will establish with Isaac, whom Sarah shall bear to you at this set time next year. So if you notice in the double page spread, the arrows go with which part of the covenant is addressed and who is not addressed. Now Ishmael, it says, to be a great nation is a wonderful blessing, but it is not the same as being in the Abrahamic covenant. That is reserved for those who are of Isaac's descendants and those who keep the terms of the covenant. Therefore, you know that only those who are of faith are of the sons of Abraham. It says Galatians 3:7, and Galatians 3:29 explains that if you are Christ's, then you are Abraham's seed, heirs according to the promise. So if you come through Christ, you are considered heirs of Abraham. But if you do not come through Christ, you are not an heir of Abraham. That is not the same thing as being involved in the covenant the same. So Abraham is not in this covenant because they are not in the lineage of Isaac. Although it identifies the covenant to be with the, quote, sons of Israel and not uniquely Isaac's line, this is not correct. Now, Abrahamic covenant reiterated through Isaac. So Genesis 26:3-5, dwell in this land, and I will be with you and bless you. For you and your descendants I will give all these lands, and I will perform the oath which I swore to Abraham your father. And I will make your descendants multiply as the stars of heaven, and I will give your descendants all these lands, and in your seed all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. Understanding Abraham's covenant with God, we need to look at the surrounding cultures who is not in the covenant, and we need to look at why Abram was chosen. So there's the promised land, which is spelled out, okay? But in the promised land, there are Canaanites, there are giants, there's Keturah's line, and there's Esau's line that already exist in this land. But God has promised this to him. Then we have the fulfilled promised land, which is a little easier to see, and that I put in a more faint lighting, where those original people lived that were mixed, and they were supposed to be taken out in the conquest. So Genesis 15 is where all of this information is basically from. The land promised for descendants, Isaac's lineage, and slaves. The promised land was for the Israelite nation. It was not for everybody. It was not for one group. It was not for the original people that lived there. God's the one who decided that, not man. So from the river of Egypt to the great river Euphrates seems to be where the 1,000-year reign of Christ total land is going to be, okay? But here's who originally was living in these areas. We've got the Kenites, or they were metal workers, smiths, okay? And they were tribes of Cain. The language changed from Cajun to Cagayan and then to Cain. And these were the tribes of Midian and Keturah's line. Moses' father-in-law's tribe, although he was a priest of Midian near post-Exodus, some moved with Israel to Megiddo. Jael, who pierces the warrior's temple in her tent, was also from this tribe. And also some from this tribe were prophesied against by Balaam. Then we have the Kenizzites, which are descendants of Kenaz, means hunter, the tribe named for Esau's grandson Kenaz. They were coppersmiths. They also had the tribe of Caleb, Joshua's friend, who was also fully followed the Lord, from Kadesh Barnea. And Caleb also inherited Hebron later because he wholly followed the Lord, God of Israel, and was made part of Judah by marriage. And that's coming up later. The Cadmonites are Easterners or indigenous, the first ones to live in the East, defined by historical documents as being, quote, Orientals, meaning east of the Dead Sea, or Jordan in our terms, because this was a Canaanitish nation. Okay, the Hittites were descendants of Heth. The name means fear or terror. It was Canaan's second son, plus Esau. They intermarried. Also lived in the central Anatolia, Turkey, and North Lebanon regions. They were known as fierce warriors. Ephron the Hittite sold the cave Machpelah, opposite Mamre, to Abraham for Sarah's burial. The Hittites had an outpost at Hebron, one of the peoples in the Canaanite region. The Perizzites belonged to a village to be separate and unwalled in the South Canaanite region in the mountains of Judah territory. Rephaim is where the giants, an old race, a tribe of giants, lived. Rapha, or the Raphaites, and the Emites were in Canaan west of Jordan and in the south plains of Jerusalem. They were considered tall and great in size and formidable warriors. The Philistines, David fought Ishbi-Benob, a descendant of Rapha, in a later battle. Og was of this tribe and was from the king of Bashan. He was of this race. The remnants of the giant races, there seem to be 3 of them, I'll show you that later, still left at the time of David and Goliath. These are called Gathites or Philistines. In historical documents, they were one of a collection of giants like the Anakim or Anakites, or what some people call the Nephilim. So we're going to have a summary on a different page about giants. Don't worry about it. We'll get into it. The Amorites, or Asair, was a mountaineer, a Canaanitish tribe of the second son of Canaan, Heth, also known as Amorite or the Amori, modern-day Syria. Two famous kings were Sihon, the ruler of half of Gilead, and Og, who was a giant, and this references the area west of Jordan. The Canaanites were zealous, the inhabitants of merchants or dwellers of the tribes of Canaan. Also, the Canaanites, it's about the same. The language shifted a little. The Canaan, a son of Ham, they were dwellers in the lower region on the seashore and banks of the Jordan, famous for being merchants and peddlers and traffickers. They worked very closely with their neighbors, the Ishmaelites, who conducted mercantile caravans. Girgashites dwelled in clayey soil. A Girgashite was a descendant of a Canaanite living in east of Galilee. They were called a Canaanitish people. The Jebusites, a place trodden down, descendants of Jebus, the third son of Canaan, who lived around the site of Jebus, also known as Yebusi, the early name for Jerusalem. So a Canaanitish nation also, a city of neighboring mountains. So why was Abram chosen? Genesis 18:17 through 19 says, "For I have chosen him in order that he may command the children and his household after him, that they do keep the way of the Lord and do righteousness and justice, so that the Lord may bring to Abraham what he has spoken to him." Hebrews 11:8 says, "By faith Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to the place which he would receive as an inheritance. And he went out not knowing where he was going." James 2:23 says, "And the scripture was fulfilled, which says, Abraham believed God, and it was accounted to him for righteousness, and he was called a friend of God." So Abraham was called out, set apart from the culture to be a monotheist, live in righteousness, and live justly. Of course, he was surrounded by none of that. He was isolated. He was the only one doing that, like us, in many cases. Genesis 15:18 says, "To your descendants I have given this land from the river of Egypt to the great river Euphrates." And there's verses we can look at, and it really is referencing the end times when Jesus is ruling for the 1,000-year reign, because it includes the highway of holiness in this time period and the city of truth. So the 1,000-year reign. So let's talk about slavery and servants in ancient Mesopotamia, because they had very strict laws and rules that are in ancient documents. Hammurabi's Code, which is a Mesopotamian document, and the documents from Mari, which is Syrian, North Mesopotamian documents, explain clearly the laws and customs of these times. Haran was the epicenter for all trade and also the slave trade. The majority of slaves were European white Gentiles. From military conquests, they were more highly valued as labor and soldiers, and a smaller amount were imported from the Sudan and then later Ethiopia, which were most often used as domestic servants and as concubines. Egyptian slaves were thought to be stupid and adverse to education, but they were very skilled in manual crafts. The Europeans from the deep eastern regions were seen as undesirable and untrustworthy. When the Mari people took over Haran, remember the timeline, around 2400, they brought their record-keeping skills, and they kept studious records of all trades, including slaves, and the rules. So from 2000 to 1500 BC, there were three types of slaves. There were debt slaves, punishment for crimes, and those who were prisoners of war. The female slaves were primarily for household chores, being nannies, and being concubines. Those would be separate slaves. You wouldn't use the same slave for the same job. The houseborn slaves could be graciously given a certificate of freedom. If this was done, their name was changed from servant or slave to wife. It didn't matter if they were male or female. This is reflected in Keturah's status change because in the Bible she is called both a concubine and a wife. It shows she had a strong status change. This is why Jesus, John, and Paul use the bride references as a change of status from a person from being a slave to sin and Satan to being the bride of Christ or the wife of the Lamb. It allows the legal status change for those who are redeemed. Redeemed is the official legal word for being purchased and turned into a wife. If a concubine or slave was the parent of a man's child, her status of slavery did not change. In the Hebrew, the word servant, a slave. So in the Bible, when reading servant, you can exchange that word in your mind as slave. It meant the same thing. Sudanese, the men and women were mostly used for domestic servants, and they were most often called Africans. Sudanese are the darker-skinned, rounder-nosed, darker-skinned people. The Ethiopians have white features, darker skin, and light eyes. The Ethiopian women were the most desirable as concubines because they had an exotic look, they were intelligent, and sadly, in the historical records, it says they had, quote, delightful bodies and the ability to sing and dance, but they were also used as domestic servants at times. Okay, it was the law. If a woman was barren, she had to give her slave or servant to her husband to continue the male's genetic line. So now it doesn't seem as crazy that Sarai's like, here, sleep with my slave. That has always been strange to me. But this is the law. And the slave could not be sent away, but had to become part of the family for the slave of a son she bore, making Sarai's request unlawful and improper when she told him to send her away. And this is why Abraham was displeased, because it was his responsibility to take care of them. A slave who was adopted was called a servant, not reflected in the Bible language. Hebrew assumes all know that a servant is a slave. So tasks of a male slave would be butcher, stonemaker, fisherman, estate worker, tanner, weaver, boat building, metal worker, stonesmith, pottery maker, guard or protector of the property, and soldier. White slaves in Abraham's era came mostly from the northwest or modern-day Turkey and Russia, so Japheth's family. 20 shekels were for white slaves. As a note, Joseph was sold for 20 pieces of silver, and this was a shekel in that time. So Joseph was clearly of lighter skin. 10 shekels were for a non-white slave. 30 shekels were for replacing a slave killed in a dowry or trade, and if they had children, it was 19 shekels per child. A slave family could not be separated, so if you bought them, you'd have to buy all their children. And by 1000 BC, these rates went up to 50 and 60 shekels for a slave. Okay, we need to talk about Abraham's slave lineage. So we have Abraham who had Ishmael via a slave, Hagar. Okay. Hagar is an Egyptian bondwoman. She was a slave from Sarai. So we know that the lineage is going to come from Mizraim. Okay. And Ishmael was a wild man versus all of his brothers and an archer. Ishmael has 12 kids, as was prophesied. And they each have different regions that are basically, kind of villains in the story of the Bible, right? From Yemen to Kadesh and North Arabia and Jordan and stuff like that. But here's the interesting thing we need to look at with this dynamic. His other slave lineage, or basically concubine lineage, was with Abraham and Keturah. So she was a purchased person, but then later he married her, meaning he purchased her slave price and turned her into a non-slave. Okay, this is like his second family. Okay, so these are not in the Abrahamic covenant, but they are still significant because they are Abraham's children. So these 6 are Zimram, Jokshan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. The significant people in the story are the father of Seba and Dedan, which is Jokshan. So this is the Sabaean Ethiopian districts and southwest Arabia and Dedanites. Dedan has 3 sons. One of them is significant, which is Asherim. This comes up with the Asherites, and they have an Asher district in Palestine near Gilead. Later, Ishbosheth is king over this region. Okay, so Midian has 5 sons, and they have regions that are interesting. So here is the map that kind of spreads out where these 6 sons go. I mean, they kind of spread out all over the place, and I think that's really interesting. Okay, let's get into the giants, which, a lot of people like to obsess over. It's not that big of a deal. It's strange and weird. But basically, here's the timeline of the giants. The first mention of the Nephilim on the earth is before 2534 BC. Then we have Noah's flood at 2459. Then we have the Tower of Babel, 2242. Then we have Chedorlaomer attacks the giants, and Abraham rescues Lot that time period. We have 3 that are mentioned, Emim, Zazim, and Rapha. And then we have 12 spies see the giants. This is 1445, so the sons of Anakim. Then Moses conquers King Og, which is 1405, and he's the last Rephaim. Then we have David versus Goliath, 1037 BC. Then we have David versus the Philistine giant number 2, which is called Ishbi Benbob. And then we have the Philistine giants are all destroyed, which includes Sippai, Lami, and the man. He doesn't really get a name. So let's look at these different lines because they're kind of interesting. We've got the original giants or fallen angels, Nephilim. They're called giants or bullies. And then they procreated with women of the earth before the flood. So really, do we care about them? Not that much. Okay, because they're off the earth, their genes are off the earth. Clearly, we have another instance of taller, bigger people. So we have Anak, which is tall-necked. These are the Anakim people. And we have Arba, which is the sons of Anak. We have, from the sons of Anak come the Anakim wife, who marries the giant in Gath. He has Goliath the Gittite and Lami. Goliath and Lami are brothers. Okay. Rapha is the father of Rephaim. Okay, so these are giants, and he has the Rephaites, the king Og, the giant in Gath. The giant in Gath also had another wife, because Anakim wife is only recorded to be related to Goliath and Lami. But this other wife, he has Sippai, Ishi Benbob, and the man. So these are all Rephaim descendants. So from Rapha, before 2080. Okay, we're going to skip to Abraham and Sarah, and Nahor and Milcah. Abraham and Nahor being brothers, but they do have some related family lines we need to look at. So Abraham and Sarah have Isaac, and Nahor and Milcah have Bethuel. Bethuel moves to what basically is Syria. Padan Aram is the same thing. He has Rebekah and Laban. Okay, Isaac marries Rebekah. So Laban has 2 daughters named Leah and Rachel, which come up again. So Isaac and Rebekah have Esau and Jacob, And Jacob marries both Leah and Rachel through deception because Laban tricks him. So that is a very connected family right there. Next, we're going to dive into Seir, which we need to understand in order to get more information on Esau. So Seir is the Horite, and he was from the Dead Sea region of Mount Seir. He has 2 kids that are of one mother, which is Lotan and Timnah. Lotan has Hori and Homam. And then brothers from another mother are Shobal, Zibeon, Anna, Dishon, Ezer, and Dishan. Okay, you can zoom into that, check it out. But basically, these are the Horites. Why do we care about that? Because in Genesis and Chronicles, it's mentioned, and these are going to be connected to the chiefs of Edom in a second. So this is the primary thing we need to know. The genetics come out of Egypt. They are EV22, so they look like Andalusians from Spain, so like Spanish people with like a particular look. They are devotees of the Egyptian god Horus, the son of Ra. They are Horites. They only married within the Horite tribe. It was very strict. The Horites were known as, quote, hairy men, meaning they were furry people. The Horites were pushed out of Edom by the sons of Esau. The priests had shaved heads like Egyptians, and they had a solar bleached tattoo on their face when they were mummified. The priests were also shepherds. They felt that Horus was in the 3 superior planets, so their terms, Mars, what we call Mars, they called the Horus of the horizon. Jupiter was Horus, who unites the lands, and Saturn was the bull of the sky. All right, so we need to get into Esau, which is Jacob's brother. Esau has 14 chiefs of Edom. And let me just dig into this. Roll with me. You'll get more information as each page goes by here. So we have Esau has 4 different wives. Ada's children, they have Elphiaz. Elphiaz has chief of Timnah, chief Omer, chief Zepho, chief Kenaz, that one's important to our story, chief Gatam, and then Timnah has chief Amalek, that's important as a villain, and then Aholibama has chief Jehush, Jalem, and Korah. Mahalath has Ruiel. Ruiel has Nahath, Zerah, Shammah, Mizziah. And then here's a little map of their region. Joshua 24:4 says, "And to Isaac I gave Jacob and Esau, and I gave Esau the hill country of Seir to possess, but Jacob and his children went down to Egypt." Now remember, if Esau was given the country of Seir, we just looked into Seir, the Horite. So basically God gave Seir, the Horite's land, to Esau. Now, something that's going to just keep coming up are different prophecies that coordinate. Esau had warnings and consequences throughout the Bible. I'm going to overview that. But basically, there are judgments on Edom. Why is that? It says very specifically in the Bible, pride of heart, boasting of mouth versus God, uncircumcised heart, thinking yourself invincible. I mean, it goes on and on. What will occur? Very specific things are listed in the Bible. You get to drink the cup of God's fury, birth pangs, earth shaking, swords, etc. Okay? Why? What's going on? Is there any hope for these people? All these things are going to happen. It's going to be pretty rough. There is hope. The fatherless children will be preserved alive. The widows will trust in God. Some will turn back. They will hear and follow the counsel of the Lord. So some will be saved, even though judgments are going to come upon this group of people. But because of Esau's behaviors, Malachi 1:3 says, "But Esau I have hated." Why is he hating Esau? Because he was not a good person. And the people against whom the Lord will have indignation forever. Why is this? Hebrews 12:16 through 17 lists that Esau was a fornicator and a profane person, for he found no place for repentance, and he sought it diligently with tears after it was too late. Look into that page. I don't have time to read the whole thing because we need to get into some bigger stories. So we need to get into Esau's kin, okay, in more specifics. Okay, so getting into the details of Esau's lineage, we need a double page spread to understand this because he has kind of two sides of the family that come up with all of those 12 different tribes because he has all these wives and everything, right? So first of all, we understand that on the Shem side, there's Terah who has Abraham. It's Abram and Abraham because they marry at different ages. Okay, so Shem has Terah. Terah has Abraham or Abram, either way. So on the Sarah line, it's having Isaac marries Rebekah. This gives us Esau, right? Esau has the sons of Esau born in Canaan. While with Esau, they moved to Mount Seir. Remember Seir the Horite, which is Edom, Idumea, and the Horites where they live. And he moved because he had so many cattle, he needed space. That's what the Bible says. He needed more space, so he moved. Okay, then we've got Abraham and Hagar, that side of the family. Abraham, they have Ishmael. Ishmael has Mahalahath, and Mahalahath has Reuel, which is one of the chiefs of Edom. Now, looking at the bigger picture, Hagar, which is Abram's wife, comes from the Ham line. So it goes Ham, Mizraim, Hagar. Okay. So the Mizraim line, we get Seir the Horite, okay, and Timnah, which is the mother of Amalek. There are 4 wives of Esau. The first wife is Judith, the second is Basemath, the third is Ada, and the fourth is Aholibama, right? So how do these people come to be? Still following the Ham line, Canaan. Canaan has Sidon and Heth. We're going to go the Sidon line. Sidon, Zibeon, he comes up with the Hivite people. And he has another wife, which is Aholibama, which is from the hills of Judah and Edom. And these are the Hivite people. This wife of Esau has 3 of those leaders, Jeush, Jalam, and Korah. We have Canaan, which has Heth, Elon. He has 2 daughters, which is Basemath and Ada. Those are both Hittites, and they have Elphiaz. Then we have Heth has Beeri, another son. So Elon and Beeri are siblings. And they have Judith. And Judith, her name means Jewess. And she's a Hittite also. We know that they got married, but we have no record of any children coming from Judith. All right, on to Jacob. Jacob has a complicated story because he meant and wanted to marry Rachel, but he is tricked into marrying Leah. Then as they're having their children, each of these sisters offers their maiden or slave to be a mother so that they can keep up this massive race to 12 children. So we're going to just go each one. Jacob and Leah have Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah. Also, they have Issachar, Zebulun, and then the daughter Dinah. Zilpah, which is Leah's slave, has Gad and Asher. We know that since of location of where Leah is and what it means to be a slave and not a concubine, that Zilpah was probably from Sudan. We have Jacob and Rachel, his preferred wife. So there's Joseph. And then Jacob has this name change, and his name changes to Israel. So Benjamin is the 12th child, but he is the first child to Israel. He is the last child to the entire family, but he is the first child of Israel, making him the firstborn to God's promised people. Then we have Jacob and Bilhah. This is a slave again, which means it had to come from Sudan in that time period. So here we have Dan and Naphtali. And then Joseph, he later, when he is in Egypt, marries Asnoth. And he has several other children, but the only two that are kept in the record for this count are Manasseh and Ephraim, and later Jacob takes them to be his own. That's why they get to be on this page. So let's look at the timeline. We've got Abraham is born in 2166. Isaac is born in 2066, 100 years later. Isaac and Rachel get married in 2026. Jacob and Esau are born in 2006. Abraham dies in 1991. There's a famine, and Isaac and Abimelech situation happens in 1966. Esau marries a Canaanitess in 1966. God appears to Isaac and Beersheba in 1966. Blind Isaac blesses Jacob and Esau in 1929. Esau marries Ishmael's daughter, 1929. Jacob and Laban start the first 7 years in 1929. Jacob marries Leah, then Rachel in 1922. They start the second 7 years for earning the daughter he wanted in 1922. And then Jacob's rapid family increase from 1922 to 1915, year 1 through year 7. So there's 7 years at 364 weeks. There's one pregnancy, has to be 40 weeks. The same mother with recovery time would be a minimum of 44 weeks. 40 plus 7 times 44 is 348 weeks. That's the minimum needed to get the entire family crammed in. If you just had them like every 2 seconds, boom, boom, boom. So the end of 7 years is 1915 BC. Joseph is born in 1915. Jacob starts 6 years of flocks in 1915. Jacob and family leave for Shechem in 1909. God blesses and renames Jacob to Israel in 1898. Jacob goes home to Mamre, Hebron, and sees Isaac there in 1898. Benjamin is born in 1898. He's not born until Hebron, after the name change. Joseph is sold, taken into Egypt in 1898, same year. Jacob dies in 1859. Okay, so here's a little spread of Jacob's family going to Egypt. This is covering Genesis 24 through 35. It gets a little confusing because there's different information in different places. And if you look at Genesis 46 and Acts 7 and Exodus 1 and Deuteronomy 10, it starts getting confusing because it says there's 75 people and 66 people and 4 people and 70 people. And you're like, okay, can we pick a number? So we're going to solve all that here, okay? So Leah, these are her children, okay? And if you look below, it has their children listed, but some of them are crossed off. The people crossed off did not enter into Egypt, but they are children. They are children. Then we have Bilhah's children, Zilpah's children, and then we have Rachel and Joseph. Joseph is counted in the count because he goes to Egypt, just not with everybody. And then all their children. So let's look at the numbers. Now let's unpuzzle this little thing. 75 is the total head count of all the entire family of Jacob, including sons, grandsons, wives, including Joseph's wife in Egypt, and the daughters and himself. Jacob, Acts, and the Septuagint, which is more accurate than the Hebrew, both say 75 were the whole family, and that this is who went to Egypt, meaning they crossed over into Egypt somehow. Then 66, this is the number of sons and grandsons from Jacob's body or seed, including Manasseh and Ephraim, because in Genesis 48:5, Jacob takes these first 2 of Joseph's boys for himself, meaning they become a part of the official lineage. Sarah and Dinah are daughters, and they were counted in the sons from the seed count because they are genetic lineage from Jacob's seed. Then we have 4, the number of wives added from Jacob's body count. And then 70, the Hebrew seems to be inaccurate. The Septuagint says 75 go to Egypt. So if you consider that there were 75 in the family, and Joseph and his 2 boys and Benjamin were already there, and the 2 of those did indeed go to Egypt, although not at the identical time as Jacob, and the other 2 were born there, who are part of the official lineage, it makes perfect sense. Simply a scribal error, most likely in Hebrew, but let's just say 70. Let's just say it is 70 and the Septuagint is wrong. Subtract from 75 Joseph and his family and Benjamin, who was held behind as collateral, and the total is 70. So maybe they're both right. Let's look at this timeline. We've got the Egypt timeline. Okay, we're going to scan across the top. We've got Abraham goes to Egypt, Abrahamic covenant. Joseph is born in 1915. Jacob moves from Shechem. Jacob goes to Mamre or Hebron. And then scanning over, we've got the captivity begins in 1846. Hammurabi is the king of Babylon in 1792. Moses is born in 1526. Exodus is 1446. We enter the promised land in 1406. In Solomon's 4th year, which is how we get to all this math, is 967, and no one contests this number. Now, at the top, it says there's 191 years from promise of the people to enter the strange land. So from 221 to 400 years of slavery. And then the years of promise to the promised land are 661 years. So if we scan down, I'm going to go to the bottom and show you who's in charge in Egypt. Okay, so we've got the 11th dynasty in F2, the 12th dynasty, which includes Amenemhat II, and then Senusret II. Then we go to Senusret III, Amenemhat III, Amihos I, and Tutmos III. Okay, so in Egypt, why is this important? We have, this is the Amenemhat II is the 12th dynasty. That's when Joseph was brought to Pharaoh. Then we have Senusret II. We have a different Pharaoh, and this is the one that has the dreams that Joseph needs to solve. We have Senusret III, which are the 7 bad years Pharaoh, different guy. And then we have Amenemhat III, which is the mean Pharaoh that takes the Israelites captive. We have Amihos I Pharaoh, which is the one who wants to murder the firstborns. And then we have Tutmos III, which is the Exodus Pharaoh. So what happens in between these two, all these timelines? We can see that there's a bigger picture happening here. It had to be very specific and very laid out perfectly in order for all of this to fit. And God designed that. So here we have Joseph is sold the same year. And then we have he gets married. He has these kids. Then there's all these years in Egypt. There's Jacob dying. Then everything switches over when Joseph dies. And so you can just see that there's no opportunity for there to be some strange understanding of all of this. It's very historical. Okay, we're going to go through each son's family line real quick. We have Reuben. His highlights are he slept with his stepmother Bilhah at age 24. He lost his status as the firstborn for the inheritance because of this. His inheritance was given to Joseph's children, and he did save Joseph from being murdered or sold. He had good intentions, even though he was not successful. When taking Benjamin to Egypt as proof, he offered his own 2 sons as collateral. So he had 4 sons here, Hanok, Palu, Hezron, and the R means it's the Hezron of Reuben, because there's different Hezrons, and then Carmi. Then we have Simeon and his family. Simeon is one of Jacob's favorite children. Next to Joseph and Benjamin, he conspired versus Joseph to sell him into slavery. He was bound as a hostage in Egypt until Benjamin could be brought. He was a violent man when defending his sister Dinah, even against his father's wishes. He was deceptive versus Hamar's family regarding circumcision. and with his father regarding what happened to Joseph. He was called by Jacob as having their swords as a weapon of violence. He killed in fierce anger and was cruel to animals. His kind were promised to be dispersed into Israel. He was an angry, jealous man with hatred in his heart. He had 6 kids. Here they are. The next son is Levi, and he's got these 3 kids: Gershon, Kohath, Merari. Get used to those. You're going to see those quite a lot. He was a violent man when defending his sister Dinah, even against his father's wishes. He was called by Jacob as having their swords as a weapon of violence. He killed in fierce anger and was cruel to animals. His kind were promised to be dispersed into Israel. He was deceptive versus Hamor's family regarding the circumcision. He was involved in selling his brother Jacob to Ishmaelites. The descendants of Levi were dispersed throughout Israel and caused to serve in the temple as Levites and priests for all time. Then we have the sons of Judah, which are 3 children by one woman, and then 2 children by another woman. And then this leads down to 2 more children that are listed as family who enter into Egypt. So Shelah, Perez, Zerah, Hezron, and Hamuel are the only ones that enter into Egypt. The crossed off ones did not make it. Either they died or they chose not to go. Nobody knows. They are not counted. Issachar, he has 4 kids. Zebulun has 3. You can read the details. We have Joseph, who has Manasseh and Ephraim. Joseph's personal highlights are firstborn of Jacob's favorite wife. He was handsome in form and appearance. He was given a coat of many colors, which triggered jealousy between his brothers and himself. He gave a bad report of the brothers to the concubines to Jacob. So these brothers were given a bad report: Dan, Asher, Gad, and Naphtali. So they were so upset that they plotted to kill Joseph after the bad report was given, and they wanted to sell him to the Ishmaelites, and they sold him. They did sell him to Midianites and Ishmaelites, and then those people sold him to Potiphar, an officer and captain of the guard of Pharaoh in Egypt, when he was 17 years old, for the price of a white slave, 20 pieces of shekel of silver. He was a prophetic dreamer, which also made his brothers not like him. He served in Potiphar's house. He denied sleeping with his wife. He was jailed on false pretenses. He was gifted with dream interpretation and helped 2 in jail, which eventually made word to the Pharaoh. When he interpreted the Pharaoh's dream, he was elevated to number 2, or vizier, at 30 years old in all of Egypt, to prepare for the 7 good years pre-famine and 7 bad years during famine. He led Egypt and his family in this process. He was given the Egyptian Potipharah, priests of On's daughter, as a wife. His first 2 children, Manasseh and Ephraim, were adopted by Jacob as his own and counted in the official family as heirs. Genesis 48:6 suggests that Joseph had more sons, but they were all named under the first 2, not by name. He tested his brothers and made them suffer a little before revealing himself. So he has a little vengeance in his heart, but he doesn't really take it out on them. Then we have Benjamin. He looked like his mother. He was favored by Jacob. He was shown favored by Joseph 5 times more than his brothers in Egypt. He was used to test his brothers. He was a warrior's temperament against the enemy, and he shares the winnings with those who he had wars with. He was age 27 when he entered Egypt, and he already had 10 of the 12 of his kids at age 27. My merciful heavens, I don't know how many wives that is. So here are the children. The 2 girls were not counted. So Bela, Ashbel, Ehi, Muppim, Huppim, Becher, Ger, Rosh, Naaman, and Ard. Now, this family line gets complicated, and we will simplify it later. Then we have Gad. Gad has 7 kids. Then we have Asher. Asher has 5 kids, but then Beriah's kids, he has 2 of those. Those are also counted as family entering Egypt. Dan has 1 child. Naphtali has 4 children that enter Egypt. Okay, so that's the end of the very first section, how we get from Adam to the 12 tribes. Okay, then we're going to start unpacking a little more. Some of the beginning of that had to be a little detailed, and you get some stuff because later it's going to come into play. We're going to try and do less detail and more, story as much as possible. Okay, so stick with it. We're coming into some interesting stuff, and I hope you're enjoying it. See you next time.